While John and Paul received all the praise, Ringo Starr was usually the one who laughed and grinned. But he's launching a bomb that no one saw coming at the age of 84. Beneath that joyful exterior was a father who had consumed so much alcohol that he blacked out, swore at his wife in a fit of wrath, and left his children behind. Worse, no one knew that he had nearly died twice. This is the Ringo narrative that fans could never have imagined. From his covert health issue to the violent episode that landed him in rehab. On July 7, 1940, Ringo Starr was born Richard Starkey in a modest home located in Liverpool's Dingle district at 9 Madron Street. Elsie Gleave Starkey and Richard Starkey Sr., his parents, put a lot of effort into supporting their family. His mother was employed in a bakery, while his father had worked on a wharf before turning to baking. His father's departure from the family in 1943 made an already difficult life much more difficult. Ringo had just turned 3. To provide for them, his mother worked many jobs. She did all she could to earn a living, first as a maid and later as a bartender. She always watched out for her son, and was protective of him, particularly as he was dealing with a series of health issues. Ringo had to have surgery for appendicitis when he was 6 years old. An otherwise routine procedure devolved into something much worse. A severe illness called peritonitis spread throughout his body. He went into a coma and stayed in Myrtle Street Children's Hospital for a year to recuperate. He had just begun to catch up with his studies when he became unwell again. He got TB at the age of 13, which killed hundreds of people in England every year. He spent 2 years in a sanatorium after being sent there this time. He fell behind in school as a result of spending so much time in bed, but it also exposed him to something that would transform his life. The medical staff planned music sessions to keep the kids occupied. Ringo began playing percussion instruments, learning how to strike maracas and drums with colored dots. This was the beginning of his passion for drumming, even if he was unaware of it at the time. School didn't seem relevant by the time he recovered. He struggled to catch up since he had missed so much. He left school without any credentials at the age of 15. He entered the workforce right away, much like the majority of Liverpool's working-class youngsters. Before landing a job as a machinist, he held a number of positions, including a brief one with British Rail. He wasn't passionate about it, but it was steady. In 1957, Ringo Starr and his neighbor Eddie Miles founded the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group, which marked the beginning of his musical career. At the time skiffle was popular throughout Britain. It was an unadulterated blend of jazz, blues and folk performed on modest instruments. Instead of drums and bass guitars, they utilized tea chests and washboards. By tapping a thimble on a washboard, Ringo discovered his own method of maintaining rhythm. The band soon became well known after playing local shows. They were popular in Liverpool because to songs like Walking Cane and Rock Island Line, they even played in the Cavern Club, which would go on to become an iconic location in the history of the Beatles. It was there that Ringo made his debut on July 31, 1957. Everything changed that Christmas. Ringo received his first drum equipment from his stepfather. Only a bass drum, a snare drum, and a homemade cymbal were used. However, it was sufficient. With a real drummer, the band sounded better, and became more well-known. Despite their popularity, the enthusiasm for skiffle was waning. American rock and roll began gaining traction by the beginning of 1958. After the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group disbanded, Ringo was left unsure of what to do next. An opportunity presented itself when Rory Storm and the Hurricanes sought a drummer in November 1959. They were among the top rock and roll bands in Liverpool, more polished and expert. After joining, Ringo quickly adopted a new persona. Because of his love of country music and the rings he constantly wore, he became known as Ringo Starr. During their performances, Rory Storm offered him a unique slot known as Star Time, during which Ringo sang. He added to his developing stage presence by performing Shirelles tunes like Boys. The Hurricanes were well liked everywhere, not just in Liverpool. They obtained a residence at Wales Butlins holiday camp at the beginning of 1960. At the time, their weekly salary of £25 was a respectable sum. They were performing at the Kaiser Keller Club in Hamburg, Germany, by October. The Hurricanes were the most popular band at the time, but the Beatles were also present. During that time, Ringo got to know George Harrison, Paul McCartney, and John Lennon. Ringo occasionally stood in for Pete Best, the drummer with the Beatles, when he was unable to play. He recorded Summertime one evening on October 15, 1960, with Lou Walters, the bassist for Rory Storm, and John, Paul and George. Ringo performed with the individuals that would subsequently form his band for the first time. The Beatles never forgot their Hamburg evenings. Ringo's drumming was excellent. His easygoing demeanor was a perfect match. Pete Best, however, found it difficult to relate to the other members of the band. They obviously needed a makeover by the middle of 1962. Their changing sound wasn't complemented by Best's drumming, and his aloof demeanor only made matters worse. They made the decision to swap him out. John Lennon and Paul McCartney drove to Pobwilhili from Liverpool on August 15, 1962, in search of Ringo. They offered him more than he was earning with Rory Storm, £25 a week, to join the Beatles. He hesitated at first. Although he thought the Beatles had something unique, he remained faithful to the Hurricanes. He risked it. Pete Best was let go on August 16, 2 days later. Ringo was a Beatle by official definition. On August 18, he performed with them for the first time in Birkenhead's Hume Hall. It wasn't a simple transition when Ringo Starr took Pete Best's position as the Beatles' drummer in August 1962. Pete's supporters were incensed. The audience shouted, "Pet forever, Ringo never," at their first official performance with Ringo at Hume Hall in Birkenhead. At the Cavern Club, where half of the crowd publicly objected, the response was much more severe. George Harrison was hit in the eye because the situation became so heated. He was even struck by a bus later that day. Despite the overwhelming animosity, the Beatles refused to back down. Because of Ringo's excellent drumming, George and Paul had campaigned for him. John was also on board. Ringo had previously stepped in for Pete and impressed the company with his dependability and competence. The demonstrations eventually subsided. Ringo's contributions to the band were noticed by fans. Their sound was enhanced by the swing and looseness of his drumming. He wasn't ostentatious, but the Beatles gained confidence from his rock-solid playing. Decades later, Pete Best acknowledged that the choice was appropriate. It was a pivotal moment. The band's final configuration included Ringo, and their ascent to international renown was unstoppable. Ringo's role changed as the Beatles did. His consistent drumming supported the band's transition into folk rock on Rubber Soul, 1965. He took rock music in a daring new path by blending his Norwegian woodbeats with George's sitar. After then, Ringo's playing grew even more avant-garde in Revolver, 1966. He had never used a mesmerizing drum rhythm like the one on Tomorrow Never Knows. Naturally, Yellow Submarine also showed off his fun side, which increased his fan base. Ringo had solidified his position in the sound of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by 1967, one of the best albums ever released. On With a Little Help from My Friends, his drumming was straightforward yet flawless, supplying a consistent beat for his passionate vocal delivery. He was no longer only the drummer, he had a crucial role in the band's identity. Even though Ringo didn't sing very much, his performances were unforgettable. His voice was the inspiration to Yellow Submarine. It was enjoyable and cheerful, which was ideal for his disposition. With a little assistance from my buddies, it became an anthem that was adored by fans of all ages. A tune written to suit his voice. Although his voice lacked technical brilliance, it was honest, accessible, and warm. The song was timeless because of its genuineness. Ringo was more than simply the man behind the drums, as seen by the popularity of both songs. By the late 1960s, the Beatles had changed from their previous form. The cohesion that had characterized their formative years had vanished. They were being torn apart by outside factors, personal conflicts, and creative disagreements. Paul McCartney wanted to maintain the band's emphasis on well-structured pop songs. Under the direction of Yoko Ono, John Lennon was shifting toward experimental music. With songs like Here Comes the Sun and Something, George Harrison had become into a powerful songwriter, yet he frequently felt underappreciated. The situation worsened when Yoko Ono entered the studio. She was always by Lennon's side after 1968, even when recording is taking place. This was a big move for the band because they had never let strangers in previously. Lennon took Ono's artistic suggestions seriously. She was perceived by the others as meddling. This was a concern for Paul McCartney in particular. He said that Lennon allowed Ono to lead the group into avant-garde area during Revolution No. 9. Harrison found the change difficult as well. His relationship with Lennon had changed. The 1968 White Album sessions were a boiling point. The studio had a tight atmosphere. The hardest hit was Ringo Starr, but everyone felt alone. The others, he thought, were nearer to one another than to him. In actuality, though, they were all in agreement. McCartney, who even took over his drumming back in the USSR, was particularly critical of it. Ringo was severely affected. He then said that he felt abandoned and out of it, as if he were being abandoned while the others got closer. A breaking point was reached. He left the band because he was tired and frustrated. Ringo fled to Sardinia as the rest of the Beatles battled without him. He wrote Octopus's Garden, a song that would eventually be featured on Abbey Road, after finding inspiration there. Back in London, the band came to recognize their need for him. They even adorned his drum equipment with flowers, and gave him telegrams, praising him as the world's greatest rock and roll drummer. When he returned 2 weeks later, the band's togetherness was becoming more strained. George Harrison had adorned his drum equipment with flowers that said "Welcome Back" when he entered the studio on September 4th. Although it was an uncommon act of generosity during a trying period, the issues had persisted. Personal ties within the band had shifted. Lennon was become increasingly reclusive. His usage of heroin exacerbated the situation. Arguments were frequent. In order to give the band a private space to argue, Abbey Road engineers were occasionally even ordered to leave the room. When September 1969 rolled along, Lennon had decided. He announced to the other members that he was divorcing the band. However, Alan Klein, their business manager, persuaded him to remain silent. There were money matters to resolve. Additionally, a formal split may make matters more difficult. They continued to be known as the Beatles for a time. They were already done behind closed doors. Ringo was devastated by the split. He had always been the group's dependable member, and the laid-back one. Even he felt lost now. He had attempted to maintain harmony between Lennon and McCartney in the latter years. However, it was not feasible. They were no longer together. Disagreements over business made matters worse. McCartney wanted the band to be run by Linda Eastman's father. Alan Klein was Lennon's desire. Nobody was prepared to make any concessions. Eventually, it ended in 1970. The Beatles had finished. Every member followed their own path. For Ringo, this meant demonstrating his independence. However, he chose a different path with his debut album, Sentimental Journey, which was released on March 27, 1970, rather than diving straight into rock music. This was no ordinary debut. He grew up listening to a variety of classic oldies and tunes from the 1940s and 1950s in Liverpool. He wanted to create something special that would appeal to his mother and his family. The album was produced by George Martin, who brought in renowned arrangers including Paul McCartney's father-in-law Lee Eastman and Quincy Jones. In keeping with his heritage, the cover featured Ringo outside a bar in Liverpool. Critics were unsure of their opinions. It was deemed pleasant by some. For others it was perplexing. However, the album rose to number 22 in the US Billboard charts, and the top 10 in the UK despite receiving negative reviews. Although it wasn't a huge hit, it demonstrated Ringo's willingness to take chances. He took an even more audacious step later that year, in October 1970. Bocus of Blues, his second solo album, was entirely country. In just 2 days, a group of famous country musicians and producer Pete Drake recorded it in Nashville. Buzz Rabin wrote the title tune, which peaked in both Germany and the United States. Ringo's relaxed delivery was appreciated by critics. It was described as a fine country single by Cashbox. Although the record didn't sell well, it revealed a different side of him. He was more than simply the Beatles' drummer. He was a musician who experimented with any music he enjoyed. In 1971, the actual breakthrough occurred. It Don't Come Easy, Ringo's first significant solo success, was released in April. Although Harrison wasn't given official credit, he and George Harrison co-wrote the song. Ringo could relate to the lyrics' themes of perseverance and faith. Harrison produced the song and added his trademark slide guitar, giving it a polished yet genuine tone. It reached #1 in Canada and #4 on the US Billboard Hot 100. It even did better than singles from his old bandmates. Next was Photograph, which was published in October 1973. It is one of Ringo's most poignant songs, which he co-wrote with Harrison. The beautiful sound made the words, which conveyed a tale of lost love, memorable. The song hit the top 10 in the UK and peaked at #1 in the US and Canada. You're 16, a rendition of a Johnny Burnett song from 1960, became his second #1 hit that year. After its December 1973 debut, it shot to fame in early 1974. Carrie Fisher played Ringo's romantic interest in the song video, which added a light-hearted element. It was obvious that Ringo Starr was a solo artist by this point. This popularity was mostly due to his 1973 album Ringo. It seemed like a Beatles reunion, and was his most popular solo endeavor. Each of his 3 former bandmates made a contribution. "I'm the greatest just for Ringo," wrote John Lennon. George Harrison contributed guitar to a number of songs. Although he wasn't in the studio with the others, Paul McCartney co-wrote and sang on 6 O'Clock. Mark Bolan, Billy Preston, Harry Nilsson, and other band members were among the amazing array of musicians on the record, which was produced by Richard Perry. It yielded 2 enormous successes, Photograph and You're 16, and peaked at #2 in the United States. Ringo's charisma and the album's blend of pop, rock and poignant ballads were lauded by critics. Following the band's dissolution, it was among the greatest achievements of any former Beatle. In addition to creating music, Ringo began acting. He co-starred with Peter Sellers in the gloomy comedy about corruption and greed, The Magic Christian, in 1970. Stars like Christopher Lee and Raquel Welch made appearances in the surrealistic movie, which was based on a Terry Southern novel. Ringo portrayed youngman Grande, the adoptive son of Sellers' character, a millionaire. Although the movie garnered mixed reviews, Ringo's performance was praised. He then played the lead in the hilarious prehistoric comedy Caveman in 1981. He portrayed Atuk, a little yet clever caveman who opposes his tribe's savage king. The movie included stop-motion dinosaurs, a fictional caveman language, and outrageous comedy. Although it wasn't a big hit with critics, it eventually became a cult classic. More significantly, it had a personal impact on Ringo's life. He met actress Barbara Bach while filming, and the two quickly fell in love and were married. Ringo Starr's life took a turn for the worst in 1970, following the breakup of the Beatles. There was still success, but there was also alcohol. His drinking habit eventually became a part of who he was. He wasn't drinking a couple of drinks. He spent most of his nights in clubs and hardly remembered the performances he gave since he was lost in a world of excess. Cocaine and marijuana were also involved. Later on, he acknowledged that he was living in a daze and couldn't remember certain details of events, such as a Washington gig he performed with the Beach Boys. It wasn't much better at home. In 1975, his 10-year marriage to Maureen Cox came to an end. It had been a fairy tale of a romance. Maureen was only 18 when she married Ringo in 1965. Together they had 3 kids, but his way of life caused them to drift away. He was cheating, not showing up, and becoming more and more addicted. Then something much stranger appeared. His old bandmate and close friend George Harrison fell in love with Maureen. It took place during a dinner gathering. George came clean about his sentiments in front of everyone in the middle of the night. It was more than a moment of awkwardness. The affair was just getting started. Despite being upset, Ringo did not lose his temper. "Better you than someone we don't know," he said. Instead, his marriage was not the only thing that was destroyed. Pattie Boyd, Harrison's wife, was also devastated. Later she replied in her own unique manner by going back to modeling and having an affair. Ringo continued to drink excessively, even after the divorce. Along with Alice Cooper, Keith Moon and other rock artists who thrived on excess, he had joined the infamous drinking group known as the Hollywood Vampires. What began as a gathering of musicians became a frightening situation. Later Ringo acknowledged that they were no longer drug-using musicians. They had turned into music-loving addicts. His addiction was taking control, yet his career was still progressing. Then everything changed once more in 1980. He met Barbara Bach on the set of Cavemen, a comedy in which he portrayed a bumbling prehistoric man. They were only co-stars initially, but by the conclusion of the shoot, their relationship had grown into something more. She was a well-known actress. They quickly fell in love and were married in April 1981. Although it appeared to be a fresh start, addiction nevertheless held sway over them both. They kept using drugs and drinking. Ringo would freebase cocaine during the day and start his mornings with champagne. Barbara also battled substance misuse. Their house descended into anarchy. Later, Fogg's daughter acknowledged that she frequently hid in books because her dad and mother were too drunk to be there. They were now harming everyone around them, in addition to destroying themselves. The year 1988 marked a sea change. Ringo lost control one night. He damaged portions of their house while intoxicated. The story didn't end there. In a fury so intense that their crew believed Barbara would not make it out alive, he physically assaulted her. Everything changed at that instant. They were aware that this could not continue. One of them might not make it if they didn't stop. They visited Arizona's Sierra Tucson Rehabilitation Clinic that year. For the first time, Ringo had really tried to tidy up. Although the 6-week regimen was harsh, it was effective. He subsequently acknowledged that maintaining sobriety was difficult, even after treatment. On certain nights he had to resist the temptation to drink, grasping the sides of his drum seat after performances to prevent himself from caving in. But he remained resilient. Ringo Starr took a daring decision in 1989 that permanently altered the course of his career. He started a unique band called the All-Star Band. Producer David Fishoff came up with the concept because he wanted to form a band in which each member was a celebrity in their own right. Legendary musicians filled the initial lineup: Clarence Clemens from the E Street Band, Dr. John Billy Preston, Rick Danko, Levian Helm, Joe Walsh from the Eagles, and Niels Lofgren from Crazy Horse. Every event included a blend of pop, soul and classic rock, with each performer contributing their own hits to the setlist. The All-Star Band's shifting roster was what set them apart. The artists on each tour were different, preserving the excitement and novelty of the concerts. Later on, the band included musicians including Randy Bachman from Bachman-Turner Overdrive, Todd Rundgren, and Burton Cummings from the Guess Who. In addition to Ringo's Beatles successes and solo smashes, the set selection usually included songs from each band member's repertoire. In the same evening, audiences heard everything from Joe Walsh's It Don't Come Easy to Life in the Fast Lane. Because of this, each concert seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It wasn't just Ringo who returned to the limelight thanks to the All-Star Band. Legends from many bands performed together as equals, introducing a new kind of performance. It was well received by fans, and the tours soon gained international recognition. In Japan, Europe, and the United States, the band performed before sold-out audiences. Ringo was the first member of the Beatles to perform in Russia in 1998. New musicians continued the practice as the years passed. Sheila E., Steve Lukather from Toto, Colin Hay from Men at Work, Peter Frampton, and Jack Bruce from Cream all joined at various points in time. With the addition of Buck Johnson from Aerosmith and Hamish Stewart from Average White Band, the lineup was still changing in 2024. Fans continued to return because of the unique vibe of the shows. Numerous locations such as San Diego's Humphreys by the Bay were frequent visits. It never seemed like simply another show, but rather like a personal experience, because of the small atmosphere. Every concert was more than simply music because of Ringo's message of love and peace. It united generations of supporters in a celebration of the past and present. Ringo Starr and his All-Star Band, The Anthology, a 3-CD collection of live recordings from many tours between 1989 and 2000, was published by Ringo in 2001. Ringo performed songs including Photograph and With a Little Help from My Friends on the CD, which captured the thrill of the performances. His colleagues' songs such as Billy Preston's Will It Go Round in Circles and Joe Walsh's Life in the Fast Lane were also featured on the album. Something extra special was a rare recording of Peter Frampton playing Norwegian Wood. Although it wasn't about sales, the anthology didn't become a commercial success. It was an homage to the friendships and music that characterized the all-star ensemble. During his time with the Beatles, Ringo's drumming was sometimes overlooked, despite his popularity as a live performer. Ringo was producing drum parts that influenced the sound of rock music, while John Lennon and Paul McCartney became renowned for their songwriting. He gave each song precisely what it required by emphasizing emotion over technicality. It was his drumming on Rain that made reverse tape loops popular. His work on A Day in the Life demonstrated how delicate fills might completely alter a song's atmosphere. One of the most iconic drum beats in history was his groove from Come Together. His effect grew more apparent over time. He was regarded as one of the best drummers of all time by Phil Collins. Dave Grohl was impressed by how memorable his straightforward beats could be. A unique distinction for a drummer, Ringo was admitted as a solo artist to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2015. The laid-back Beatle has always been Ringo Starr, however he has faced many challenges and difficulties during his life that are rarely discussed. Ringo made a remark in January 2008 that infuriated his community. He was asked if he missed anything about Liverpool when he appeared on The Jonathan Ross Show. No, he responded without hesitation, there was no worse time for him. Only a few days prior, he had contributed to the start of Liverpool's festivities as the cultural capital of Europe. Many locals felt deceived. It appeared as though he had abandoned the city, which had always welcomed him as one of its own. The outrage was not limited to newspapers or the internet. A Beatles topiary sculpture that had been erected near Liverpool's South Parkway Transport Exchange was vandalized in April 2008. All 4 band members were shown in the sculpture, which was made by Franco Coval, an Italian artist. However, the only goal was Ringo's figure. Someone used cutting tools to decapitate his head, then stole it. It was never located. The sculpture was not the first to sustain damage. Ringo's head had been attempted to be squashed earlier, but the vandals made sure it was removed this time. Despite the criticism, Ringo never expressed regret for his statement. The animosity just became worse because of his silence. In addition to public disputes, Ringo has discussed the less positive aspects of his private life. He was suffering from the effects of popularity by the late 1960s and early 1970s. He was little involved in his children's life, and battled drinking. Maureen Cox, his first wife, passed away in 1975. Their youngest child was 5 years old at the time, and their eldest was just 9. Maureen remained in the UK to raise their children by herself after the divorce, while Ringo relocated to Los Angeles. He then acknowledged much more concerning behavior in the late 1990s. In his latter years, Ringo became so inebriated that he physically assaulted Barbara Bach, his second wife. He was unable to recall the events of the next morning. Everything changed at that point. He made sobriety his first aim, when he and Bach enrolled into a recovery facility together. He tried to mend the trust he had betrayed, and mend his connection with his kids. Ringo's confessions have not received as much public attention as John Lennon's previous actions. However, they remind us that even the most adored superstars have their own battles to fight. Ringo has also been on the verge of passing away. He experienced a potentially fatal medical issue in April 1979. Decades after his childhood battle with peritonitis, the illness resurfaced. He was sent to Princess Grace Hospital in Monte Carlo when the discomfort grew intolerable. Several feet of damaged intestinal tissue were removed by physicians during emergency surgery on April 28. It came really close. Ringo attended Eric Clapton's wedding, alongside Paul McCartney and George Harrison barely 3 weeks after surgery, although most people would have needed months to recuperate. The worst thing that occurred to him that year should have been his health scare, but it wasn't. His mansion in Hollywood caught fire on November 28, 1979. Numerous pieces of Beatles memorabilia were destroyed by the fire. It served as a reminder of how swiftly things can change in life. He had to reassess his life, because of the sickness and the fire. He came to the realization that his health was more important than the crazy life he had led for years.